Hello everyone, and welcome to today's session. I am Bhavesh from the Swift Enterprise Product Management team, and today we'll be taking you through the updates that are part of the 5.3 version. Before we begin, we would like to assure you that the webinar is being recorded and will be shared with all those who had registered for the session. We would also like to hear from you, so please type in your questions and feedback in the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen anytime during the webinar, and we will take up those questions at the end of the session. Okay, so without further ado, let me get started. While we shared updates on the release 5.3 that we made recently, I just wanted to set up the context of how we have been working towards our vision to partner with our customers on their digital transformation journey. So we all know enterprises globally are increasingly using technology and software as a competitive advantage, and digital transformation goes beyond automating the manual steps, doing things faster, or improving applications by rationalizing work processes. In fact, transformation requires a fundamental change in the way we think that technology can be used to meet the business objectives. And that's why the method as well as the tool that we are going to use to achieve that next level of success has to change. So the method, as we have been seeing that the waterfall ways of working are slowly going away, and people are moving away from the traditional way of project management to the agile ways of working. So that has been our focus in our past several releases in 2018 and in 2019 also. And you have seen a lot of updates in the Agile module because of that. On the AI front, what we have also done is we have started working on a separate offering wherein you will get to see the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning techniques to predict the outcomes and recommend solutions. While we are working on ways to provide these solutions on top of our Swift Enterprise application, we are also working on something as a separate offering. So this will be an add-on for the existing modules or existing application that you have right now. And while this method of lean agile ways of working and the tools of the latest technology, we can't leave behind the medium of mobile, because everyone is on mobile these days, and we need to ensure that everyone is connected to their work while they are on the go. So we have been continuously working on updates on our mobile app as well. And like all our previous releases, you will see what we have achieved even in this release on the mobile app. So with that as the context, let me share the agenda for today's session. What we'll first look at is the new backlog refinement board that we have introduced for our agile projects. Along with that, we will see how the new widget settings have been introduced and make using the agile widgets easier. So in our previous release, what we did is we brought in a bunch of new widgets for the agile project. So we'll quickly go over those as well as look at these new settings that we shipped as part of the 5.3 version. Next, we will look at how the GitLab integration works. So this is one of the big plus which you'll get after the 5.3 version. You will now be able to integrate with the GitLab and also analyze some of its data in the pivot analytics section that we have. Along with all the application updates, you will also look at the AI-powered chatbot that we have been working on. We have made certain enhancements to the intents and the scenarios that are supported, as well as brought in the in-app chatbot so that you no longer have to rely on the Slack-based chatbot that we brought in a few releases back. On the mobile front, we finally have a way to view your project and organization level dashboards from the mobile. So that's something we'll also look at. And finally, there are some enhancements that we did across the application, which we'll quickly go over. So with that as the agenda, let me get started with the backlog refinement board. So for that, let me switch to the application view. What you're looking at is the new backlog refinement board. It will by default come up inside the plan menu of your agile projects. And every time you load it up, what would happen is it would all the user stories which are currently open and not tagged to any releases or sprints. So backlog refinement as an activity goes through several stages. typically the product owner grooms his backlog, and finally it gets prioritized and then allocated to respective sprints. So what we have done as part of this board is ensure that all these steps get well executed and they are well seen on the application as well. So that's why you see a clear classification of backlog, groom backlog, and sprint planning right on top. So you know what are the groom backlog items and what are the items ready to be taken up for sprint planning as well. So as I was saying, the first time you load the backlog refinement board, it would load all your user stories, and typically one would group them based on theme and epic. So what I've done here is I have all my user stories and they have been grouped by theme and epic. Can always change it to some other drop down I may have configured for my user stories. So it could be a module or a customer or priority, and I can always group by that as well. But for now, what I'll do is I'll look at what are the themes that have been assigned to these user stories and the individual epics inside them. So you get a clear classification of the themes and epic on the left hand side. On the right hand side, what you do get to see is also the total cards and the total points visualization in terms of how many items for those group in all have been completed, are in progress in some of the ongoing releases and sprints, or they are still pending. So you'll get a quick classification of your overall backlog as well while you are looking at it. So it's just not the items that are pending in the backlog. Typically, a product owner would require some understanding on how things have been delivered in the past releases and sprints, and that will help him prioritize for the next set of releases and sprints. So in this case, I can see that when I click on the best sellers, so bestsellers has quite a few user stories which are still pending. Some of them are in the groomed and the ready stage, but most of them are still in the backlog. Uh, 10 of them have been completed and 25 are still in progress. That is, they are tagged to some of the ongoing releases and sprint. Now, if I look at content browsing, I see that the red bar is shorter. The product recommendations, the red bar is still shorter, and app-based seller details is much shorter. So overall, I know that bestsellers is something I need to focus upon and see if I can move some of these user stories, start grooming them, and move them to the groomed backlog. So viewing your user stories is as simple as you would do on the listing. You simply need to click on the ID and it will load up the detail segment for you to fill up the details. So as you continue to fill up the details and ensure that all the details that are required for the development to be done for the user story have been updated, the next step you would do is make selection for the user stories and move them to the groomed backlog section. So while I do that, I also get to see the count and the total estimated points of the items that I've selected to move in my groom backlog. Now, once I move to the groom backlog, here I get to see all the work items that have been moved or assigned to the groom backlog section. Now, in this case, what I'm seeing is there are about 16 items that I've decided are fully groomed, and couple of them are bug fixes, 13 of them are user stories, and one of them is enhancements. So I can still go back to my backlog and maybe change my view to enhancements and say that I want to take up more enhancements in this release, and I would probably groom them and move them to my groom backlog. So depending upon what work items you have configured as your agile work item types, you will get to see them here in the backlog view as well as the groom backlog view. Now you can always look at the values without having to go inside them, because the table view that you're looking at here is the same as you would get on the respective eForm listings. So all that information is still available in the list view. In fact, if you are looking at all the work items together, just like we are seeing right now, the bug fixes, the user stories and enhancements, it will ensure that the common list of values are shown in the listing so that you do not miss out on any details, even in the common view. So here too, you have the option, once you have decided which items need to be taken up or prioritized for the next release or sprint, I can decide to select them, look at how many items I've selected, that will help me know how many items I need to still move on for my sprint planning and move it to the sprint planning section. Now, you will always have the option to move them back to the Groom backlog as well, in case you feel some of the user stories or some of the items still need to be detailed further. So in this case, what I'll do is I'll move them to add to sprint planning view. Now, once I'm into the sprint planning view, whatever items that have been prioritized out of the total Groom backlog to be taken up for the future sprint, those get shown up in the bottom bucket here. So the ready for sprint allocation is the list of items that I can now decide to allocate to my sprints. And on top, the section here shows the future sprints that have been created in this project. So in this case, I have a sprint starting from the 16th. So I'm 16 to 20th of Feb as one of my sprints, and then some March sprints. So all my future sprints will be loaded here, and I can decide to go ahead and load them further. So in this case, what I could do is I can simply drag a single item or make a multi-item selection and move them on top. So here, if I need to move items back to my ready for sprint allocation, I can still do that, because the moment I did it, it's showing me that I've overloaded the capacity by a couple of points. I can still move back some of the items and then judiciously move some of the items which I feel are required to be taken up for my sprint. Now, while every time I move the items, my capacity pyramid shows how many points can still be loaded, and you have the guidance of the sprint velocity below it, so that you know how many story points you had delivered in the last 3 sprints, what has been the best 3 sprints out of the last 12 sprints that you have delivered, and what have been the worst. So depending upon what kind of user stories you are taking up for this sprint, depending upon their complexity, or some of the risks that the team has decided to take upon in this sprint, you can base your estimate on what should be the right amount of work that should be planned for the sprint. So that's how you can go about planning the sprint, and at the bottom you will always get a work item type wise split up of how many work items have been taken up, in this case the bug fixes and the user stories. So both of them, I've taken 3 of them as user stories and 3 of them as bug fixes, so you are able to see that pie chart accordingly. And once I'm ready, I know I do not need to take further items. Maybe I can just add one more so that I've completely utilized my capacity here. And the next step would be for the team to start assigning the card owners. So for that, we will click on the go to execution board, and what it will do is it will load the execution board for the sprint I was planning for, and the team can then start choosing which items they would like to work upon. So just to quickly summarize what we looked at, we saw that the backlog view gives me a list of all the backlog items. I'm able to group them based on themes and epics or any other attributes that I configured on the user story. At the same time, I get a high level visibility of all those themes, of how many of them have been completed, how many are in progress and closed, so that I'm able to take up the right set of items to the next stage. And the next stage is, of course, the Groom backlog, wherein I collate all the items that the team has been working upon, detailing further so that they can be taken up for one of the future sprints. And once you have prioritized certain set of line items for your sprints, you can start allocating them to the sprints as well through the sprint planning view, where you have the capacity indicator so that you know how much you can load the sprint further along with the guidance of the past sprints, and go to the next step of assigning the users to the card so that the card owners can start working on them as the sprint progresses. So quick note I wanted to add here is that the backlog refinement board will be soon replacing the planning board that we have currently. So in the next couple of sprints or so, what you will see is that the backlog refinement board will start showing up instead of the planning board that you see currently. So what we would like all our customers to do is start trying out this feature on the setups. If you feel you can ensure that the teams are comfortable working them, you can enable them on your production environments as well. So right now it is disabled by default, but in one of our future releases, we will be turning it on by default. So moving on to the Agile Widget setting updates. So again, let me switch back to an Agile project where I have my data configured. So before I get into the updates which were part of this release regarding the Agile widgets, let me just give you a quick overview of what we shipped as part of the previous release as well. So what we did in the previous release is every time you have an Agile project created, we will ensure that a default set of dashboard widgets get plotted for those Agile projects, because typically you would need to have a burn down chart, your work item type distribution, your velocity, and things like that in place always. So what we have done is we have defined three default dashboard pages: the sprint, release, and quality. And each of these pages have a default set of dashboard widgets. So work item type distribution, it is similar to what we saw on the backlog refinement board. It gives me a breakup of how many work items are assigned to the current sprint, the sprint burn down chart for the current sprint, the blocking reason analysis, and the sprint velocity. Similarly, on the release front, you will see the work item type distribution there as well. Instead of the burn down, the stakeholders are usually interested in looking at the rate at which the work is getting done. So we are looking at the release burn up. Also, something which is important from a stakeholder point of view or business point of view is how much of the work which I'm shipping as part of that release is value added or non-value added. So we have a way to do that. One of the settings does allow you to select what e-forms you should consider as value added and what e-forms you should consider as non-value added. And based on that, you will get a simple representation of how much work you have delivered in the past releases and the release velocity. Similarly, on the quality front, what we have done is we ensured that the defect inflow, a standard inflow of all the defects in the past months get shown. Along with that, you will get to see the testing status trend. So this is also one of the new components that we shipped in our previous release, wherein we saw that testing automation is a critical component of any agile project. So in that case, you would typically have service tests, UI tests, and unit tests configured and getting created as the team continues to work on the sprint. If you go to the settings page here, you get to select which field on your test unit is keeping track of what kind of test it is. So in this case, I've configured them to be unit system UI, but you could have other master list values also or another field configured. So you have the option to select on which field the test type representation should happen. Similarly, you can decide on which field the automation status also needs to be represented in the chart. And again, this is a simple representation of how many test units of those were created are pending, completed, or not applicable. And this gets plotted for the past quarter by default. So in this case, I'm able to see that test units, quite a few test units have been created in December and January, and a whole lot of them are still pending and completed as well. So you get to see a overall picture of how much of the test units that have been created have been automated over the past months. And finally, on the quality front, you will see the leak defect density. So leak defect density is how many defects that you have identified in that release and how many are the total number of work items delivered as part of that release. So again, here we would want to have that flexibility of which release field you are tracking to ensure that it gets tracked as a leaked defect. So you have the option to select which field on which you have selected it to be found in release. So this is the field wherein you will decide that the defect should be counted as leaked defect. So these are the release drop downs on my defect e-form, and based on that, I get to see the release and found in release field here. So I'll select the type, the release drop down, as well as the version for which I want to track my defect leakage, and that's how I get a simple representation of my leak defect density as well. So these are the widgets that get configured by default as part of my agile projects now. And what we have done as part of this release is, uh, while you are working from one sprint to another sprint, you typically have to go ahead and change the sprint drop down. So to ensure one doesn't have to perform that step every time the transition happens from one sprint to another, we have introduced option of current sprint, so that every time the sprint changes, it automatically plots the data for the current sprint. Similarly, if there is a widget where you need to select the release as well as the sprint, you have option of selecting the current release and current sprint. And for the trend-based metrics, like we are seeing here for the sprint velocity, you have the option to specify for how many past sprints you want to see that data, so that the widget keeps plotting the data as we go on with the release deliveries. So those were the widget setting updates. Also, another update that we did was for the burn down chart. Now, the burn down chart is typically something wherein the user has to figure out on how well the team has been performing based on the ideal burn down shown here. Now, what we had also done as part of our improvements in our past releases is we started showing up if the team is slipping too much from the ideal burn down. We start showing the projected spillover, and we also start showing the percentage by which the team needs to improve their burn down so that there is no spillover happening. Now, while we started showing this statistics, it's also important that these statistics get calculated based on the working days. So as you are seeing here on the left-hand side, I have configured this as per the calendar days. I see it plotted for all the days from 4th of February to 15th of February, and everything seems to be in control here because the remaining hours are shown in green. Whereas when I plotted this same burn down for my working days, as you can see, it's highlighting that there's a possible slippage of 40 hours happening if I continue to burn at the current rate. And the team needs to improve their burn down by 11% at least, so that there is no spillover happening. So clearly, you would have a higher accuracy of the possible spillover if you have this setting enabled. So every time you plot a new widget, this setting will be enabled by default. But for all the existing widgets, we have ensured that the user can go ahead and toggle it themselves. So exclude non-working days is what needs to be enabled for you to see the burn down chart for the working days alone. So to quickly summarize what we looked at the new settings wherein selection of the current release and sprint is easy. You don't have to manually do it every time the release or sprint changes. And similarly, you can have a dynamic range set for the trend-based metrics which we have. And on the burn down chart front, what we looked at is now with the help of the setting which shows you data only for the working days, you will see the burn down and projected spillover and the percentage by which the burn down needs to be improved. All that will be much more accurate since it's referring to only the working hours as per the project calendar. So with that, let me switch over to our next section, which is the GitLab integration. In this release, what we have done is we have provided that integration so that you can ensure that all the code that you have been working on in the Git repository that can be synced with your project, it can be synced against the work items that have been worked on this project, and you are also able to view them while you are inside the work item. So for instance, if I go to one of the defects here, what you see is the Git integration tab, and it will show me all the files or changes that I may have done against that item. So the way we are able to do that is every time a comment is made in Git, this comment or the nomenclature has to be followed, wherein it has the project ID followed by the work item ID, so that every time I load up a work item, it picks up all the changes that have happened against that work item. So in this case, I know there are two file changes that have happened. If I want to know further, I can always click on it and I get to see all the changes as I would want to see inside my GitLab. So all the feature functionality which is available for GitLab, if you had logged in separately, it's available here as well. Also, along with this, what we have done is we have ensured all the Git commit data is also available as one of the views so that you can start analyzing the information as well. So in this case, what I've done is I've gone to my pivot analytics, and for my Git ALM transactions view, I've configured this view which shows me which of the users have committed the files and against which item, how many files have been changed, how many lines of code have been added, deleted, modified, and on which day. So all this information is available to you via the pivot analytics. In fact, the LOC, the line of number of lines modified, gets derived by us so that you get a wholesome picture of what all changes may have happened, and you get a better understanding of the nature of the commits that have been done against these work items. So what we looked at was the Git integration with SwiftEnterprise. As I showed you, you will be able to view all the Git commits against the work items, as well as analyze that data in your pivot analytics as well. Just to add on, the GitLab integration is available as an add-on module, so it will require a separate set of steps that needs to be followed for deployment and configuration purpose. All of that information has been made available to our support and sales team, so please get in touch with them if you'd like to have this enabled. So moving on to the AI-powered chatbot enhancements. I understand from my team that currently they are having some technical issues. So for the moment, what I'll do is I'll simply show you some of the video snippets that we had recorded for the session, and we can quickly go over them, and I'll highlight enhancements that we have shipped as part of this release. So what we are looking at here is that first time the user logs in, he's able to perform standard set of operations like getting to see which items he can work upon in his inbox and log time against some of the items. So we looked at this in one of our previous releases, but what we have also done as part of this release is you will now be able to give a thumbs up and a thumbs down every time the bot is responding with data from the server. So that helps us understand whether the work getting done or the response being shared by the bot is correct or not. So in this case, the user is providing his routing action comment so that the work item gets routed. Now we have gone beyond this in this release, wherein we have made it more in tune with what naturally a user would type in. And while interacting with the chatbot, he's able to use natural language to understand what kind of information he's looking for. So in this case, he's saying that, can you help me prioritize my work? And even this kind of statement, the bot is able to look into his inbox and prioritize based on the items that are due today, the items which have a critical priority, or the items which are currently in progress. So that's how the bot is able to understand much more than what we started out on. In fact, the user is also able to query further and get specific information about items. In this case, the defects assigned to Ashish, and obviously the bot would require context on which project the end user is referring to. So when the user responds with Swift, he would still see a drop down of selection wherein there were a couple of projects having the word Swift. And once the user makes the selection for the required project, he's able to fetch the records for all the defects that have been assigned to Ashish. Going beyond that, we are also able to get certain values back from the system as well, specifically number-based fields. So in this case, I am checking what is the total estimated effort for one of my sprints, and here I am able to see that okay, the count comes up, the sum of the estimated effort comes up right from the chatbot, because it's able to understand all the entities and all the intents that it has been trained upon. So that's what I wanted to highlight as part of the demonstration. I apologize for not being able to do a live demo right now, but I feel we have covered what we wanted to cover here as well. So you looked at how we are ensuring that the response given by the chatbot can be confirmed as good or bad, so that it helps the chatbot to learn and improve its future responses. At the same time, when the responses are ambiguous, it's able to decide uh, which are the records that the user may be referring to, and provide a way to select from one of the options, like we looked at the project name selection. And along with that, what we have also done as part of this release is we have provided an in-app chatbot. So all the interactions that we looked at in the Slack-based chatbot, all those interactions you will now be able to perform inside the application as well. Uh, as I said, our AI-based capabilities are a separate offering altogether. So this chatbot in this case it would be an add-on module, and we'll continue to work on this journey to improve and build on it further. Now moving on to the mobile app. For this, let me just log into my mobile app. So what I've done now is I've logged into my mobile app, and what you get to see is a new menu for dashboard. So if you have access to any of your project dashboards or organization level dashboard, you will see this new menu turning up here. And by default, what it would do is it will load up the first project, the recently accessed project on it, and the first widget in the first page for you to view. So the last project which I accessed here was the HP development project, and the first page it had as one of the dashboard pages. As I said, sprint, release, and quality are the visual pages for my agile project. So start showing up the widgets for those pages. Now here I can look at the work item type distribution. I can tap on it to get the complete name and the distribution here. To move on to the next widget, I'll use the arrow keys below. And now I'm able to look at the burn down chart. Burn down chart as well, like I said, the important aspect is how many remaining hours are there, and you can always tap on it and get to see the exact details, the blocking reason analysis, and the sprint velocity widget which we looked at. Now in case you are having a data like this, you can always turn to the landscape mode to view it in a much better fashion. Move on to the next page here. Similar manner, I can look at the release burn up, the value versus non-value added, the release velocity, and coming back to the quality, the testing status trend, and the defect inflow. So I'm able to look at all the information that I had access to on the web app. Like I said, if you have widgets with summary like this, that information will also be available. So you can click on this eye icon and get to see the details as well. So that's how the dashboard is available on the mobile app. So for now, what we have done is all the view related operations are working for the mobile app, and what we'll be doing as part of our future sprints is enable options to drill down to the next level and see all the details while you are looking at them on the mobile app itself. So that's what we looked at on the mobile app. All your project level dashboards and organization level dashboard widgets are available. And finally, looking at the other enhancements, what we have done as part of this release is we have provided support for some of the special characters in our ECR-based data entry columns. And as I said, the default dashboard pages are shipped, and they are also part of the PT level. So if you want to define the default dashboard page as per your own needs, you can still go ahead and do that at the PT level, and they will come down to the projects getting created from it. So that's all we had for the session today. I'll open up now for the questions and see if there are any questions that we can answer. Okay, so looks like we don't have any questions to be answered, but feel free to get in touch with the support teams or drop us an email if you have any questions. Like I said, the backlog refinement board is something that will be replacing the existing planning board in your agile projects. So we would highly encourage all our customers to go ahead and try it out and see how it works with your teams. If you have any feedback, please feel free to share it with us so that we are able to improve upon it, and by the time we enable it for all our customers by default, it will serve you better. So that's all we had for the session today. Thanks a lot. Have a nice day.